All right, so let's talk about argument and what your argumentative speech is. Now, let's start off by just assuming you probably are pretty familiar with this. I know in your English classes you've written several argumentative or persuasive papers. This is very similar, so some of the things that you're going to hear here are kind of overlap, and that's fine. But I think that they do bear some, it does need to be repeated, because some of these things that you are going to need to do to get your point across, you're going to need to be able to do those things. You need to understand those, because the problem here is that you are going to try to get people to change their minds by listening to you. And so in a paper, they can go back and reread and they can analyze and whatever. But in a speech, you're using your voice, you're using your inflection, you're using your commitment, those kinds of things, plus the information, and they're getting it in a one shot. So you have to keep in mind, you have to be very clear about this. You have to keep in mind how you're going to get people to react to your information. So let's talk about argument and persuasion. They really are, for the terms of this, they're pretty interchangeable. What we're talking about is making your point. Okay. So let's start off with what is argument. Argument is not an argument like you think about a quarrel, right? Two people fighting. They're standing, nose to nose, toe to toe, yelling and screaming at each other. That's not what it is. For what we're talking about, argument is your stand on an issue. It's what you believe in, right? And it's how you back that up, okay? And that's what argument is. So you're trying to get that point across to others. Now, for you to have a valid argument, for your argument to be valid, for your point or your stance to be valid, you have to understand that there is another side to this issue, maybe multiple sides to this issue, that different people will have different ideas on this. And that's just what it is. Now, if you think about it, if there weren't opposite viewpoints, if everybody basically believed the same thing, there's nothing to argue, right? There's no convincing needed because we're already all there. So you do have to understand that argument does have opposite valid viewpoints, okay? Now, that is not to say that they are all equal. Okay, there are always people out on the very edge, the very fringe of things, right? That are way, way, way out there, and almost nobody believes in or accepts as a valid viewpoint. Okay, let's just, that is understandable too. That doesn't make it necessarily right just because somebody has one of these way, way, way out there way, way out there positions on a topic. Okay. Also, argument, for it to be a true argument, it has to be something that you are trying to get people to change their mind on, that you're trying to persuade them to do something, to act, to believe in. Where do we see arguments? Commonly, we see them in politics, right? Like when a politician stands up and says, vote for me because I will do this, this, and this. Why are you going to do this for me? How are you going to do this for me? Prove to me that you're going to be able to. That's argument. They're trying to sell themselves, right? Reviews, watch this, read this, eat this, whatever, right? When people try to tell what they think of something. And then, of course, advertising. And almost all advertising is persuasive, okay? It is an argument. It is trying to sell you on something. Think about like even today, when you see all these messages about, we're all in this together and stay inside and be safe and whatever, sponsored by Toyota, and yes, Toyota isn't trying to sell you on staying inside. Partially they are, really, I guess, but they're also trying to attach their name to that, right? So, and that you have a positive impression of them. So they still are selling something or trying to persuade you on something. Any argument you have must be research-based, meaning that you have to bring in information to back up and prove your point. And you do have to understand that others are going to disagree with you. There are going to be people that will disagree with you, okay? And that's okay because, again, other people can have valid opposite viewpoints from you. Now, as you start doing your argument, some things to keep in mind. Language. Obviously, it has to be language that the audience understands, the word choice, the examples, things that you are doing, the audience will understand. The things that you're sharing with them, the ideas, the information, the terminology, these are all things that the audience can understand and take from you. Also, Also, it's really important to support what you're saying, to provide that information, that proof, those examples, that evidence. You really have to back up your position. A lot of times people say, oh, this was a great movie. Why? Well, because it was a great movie. Well, what made it a great movie? Because it was a great movie. That doesn't really help us any, because we don't see why you got there, how you got there. Proof that I can say, okay, yeah, I believe you, or I don't, right? And so you really want to provide lots of that support for your position. Watch out for logical fallacies, which we'll talk about a little bit. And we've talked a lot about audience and purpose, understanding who you're trying to convince, and understanding purpose, what you're trying to convince them to do. And think about that. Like, when I look at my audience, what is really going to get my audience to buy into something, right? And I think the example I've used with you before is breast cancer research, right? Why do men get involved with this? It's a huge movement. You have NFL teams wearing pink, and you got, these big fundraisers, and tons of guys show up. Statistically speaking, men don't get breast cancer, like 1 in 1 million. That's a very small number compared to women. So why do men get involved? Well, the movement has said, okay, who's our audience? How can we sell this? And they say, okay, how can we sell this to men? How can we get men involved? That's purpose. Audience men. So then they're like, okay, wait a minute. It's not you, but it's your mom, it's your sister, it's your wife, it's your girlfriend, it's your whatever, right? And so, they take that idea of, we want guys involved. We know who they are, what motivates them, and they bring that together. Okay. And so you really have to pay a lot of attention about who you are trying to sell this to. Let's talk about proving your point. Reasoning. Reasoning is that kind of logical process that you walk people through to get them to a position, right? And I'll talk about that here in just a second. Evidence, which we've talked about a lot already, about providing proof, sources, information, expert opinion, lots of people weighing in, right? Conviction. When you are speaking, now in a paper, we don't really get this outside of you saying this is the best, or this is the most, or this is the only. But when you're speaking, we want to see that you are excited about this, that you are committed to this, that you are engaged in this. If you're standing up there and just saying, well, this is a topic and this is something maybe to be thinking about, we're not convinced that you have any conviction on this at all, right? Conviction just shows that you are engaged, you are excited, you believe in this, and we really need to be able to see that. So we want to see that emphatic. We want to see that emphatic voice, that real inflection in your voice, that forceful language that you use. And then connection with the audience. And that is so important because, again, going back to my, to the example about, breast cancer research, they've done a great job in connecting that to their audience and saying, look, guys, here is why you should be involved, and make it real for them. Make that something that they are connected to, right? For you look at the end of the school year, which again, this year isn't obviously a totally great example, but seniors are excited about the end of the year, and maybe they're a little sad about this year ending, right? And they want to be involved, and they want to kind of stretch out, and they want to celebrate all these things, right? How do you get freshmen excited about that? How do you get freshmen excited to say, hey, I want to be part of this. I want to help celebrate. I want to help, seniors with this. It's harder for them because they don't see that. They don't have that same connection to the topic. Let's talk about reasoning. And when we talk about reasoning, there's two different types, inductive and deductive reasoning. Now, I don't want to see the words inductive or deductive reasoning in your paper or in your speech. I don't want to hear that. But I do want you to understand the difference between the two, because partially this is how you're going to walk your audience through your topic and your speech and your information, try to convince them. And it's also about when you look at a source and say, hey, this is a source that I do want to use or I don't want to use, because when I look at the way they rationed it out and reasoned it, I just want to make sure that they were thinking it through in the right way. So the two basic forms of reasoning are deductive and inductive reasoning. And again, I don't want to see this in your speech. I don't want you saying these words in your speech. But again, do want you to understand this process. First off, deductive reasoning, the major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. Okay, what does that really mean? So in deductive reasoning, we take a specific rule. Okay, we say, here's a rule that we believe in. And then here is, minor premise, a situation. If I take my rule that we believe in, my major premise, and I apply it to the situation, my minor premise, I get a conclusion. Okay? For instance, if I say all full-time students are eligible for financial aid. Okay? Those of you looking to go to college. If I'm a full-time student, I get financial aid. So that's my major premise. My minor premise, if I say, okay, Sarah is a full-time student. Therefore, conclusion, she is eligible for financial aid, right? So I take this rule, I take it to a particular situation or example, and then I make a conclusion or I come out with an answer, right? It's either why something happens or what might happen in the future. Inductive reasoning is the opposite. Instead of starting with a rule to put onto a situation, I take a whole bunch of situations and I look for connections between those situations, and then I draw a rule. For instance, if I look at crash data, and I look at, when this car crashes and this car crashes and this car crashes and who gets hurt and who doesn't and all these different things, right? And I look at all these different, crash data. And then I say, this car is the safest because this car has the fewest number of people that get hurt in a crash, right? That's inductive reasoning. So I look at a whole bunch of data and then I draw a conclusion. Now, the reason this is important, okay, the reason this is important, in deductive reasoning, it makes sense, right? Like here's a rule, here's a situation, here's the answer, right? The problem is there's always exceptions to the rule. There's always exceptions to the rule. For instance, if you think about, you have to be 21 to buy booze, okay? You got to be 21 to buy booze. Jim is 18. Jim cannot buy booze, right? Except Jim has a fake ID. So Jim does get to buy booze. So there's always going to be exceptions to that rule. In deductive reasoning, it makes sense because here's a rule, here's an example, here's here's an outcome. But again, you have to remember there are exceptions to that rule. Inductive reasoning, if you think about, there's a saying out there, crap in equals crap out. If I use bad data coming in, I'm going to get a bad outcome. I'm going to get bad results in the end. For instance, if I go through and I ask 10 students what the best thing about the school day is, and then I ask 10 teachers about what the best thing about school is, I'm going to get totally different answers. So if I only use one piece of or one type of data or one type of biased information, I'm going to get a much different outcome. So the lesson for you is that when you are looking at your sources, you have to be able to say, okay, is this the norm or is this an outlier? Or did they really take a nice, good, broad view of something to get a lot of good, solid information to come up with a good, valid conclusion on this information? Okay. I know this says keys to writing argument because this is, again, I use this information a lot when I talk about persuasive writing, but the information still holds true. And this is just some terminology just to be aware of as you are out there looking around. Claim, that's your assertion. That's the point you're trying to make. Appeals, that's how we connect to how we get people to connect to a topic. And that's when you've talked about logos, ethos, and pathos, right? Logos is valid information, facts, figures, numbers, statistics, examples, illustrations. Pathos is where you get people to get emotionally engaged with a topic, right? If logos is in the head, pathos is in the heart. And then ethos is your relying on ethics, values, right, wrong, good, bad, just, unjust, or Let's give you an example of appeals in action, because again, when we talk about appeals are ways that we draw your audience in and make them connect to the topic, right? Make them engage with the topic. It draws them in, it connects them. It's appeals. So take seatbelt use, okay? Let's say that you want to get people to, why do you want people to wear their seatbelts, right? A logical appeal is to show them, hey, 7 out of 10 people involved in a wreck while wearing a seatbelt survive, okay? So you could take that information. You could say, okay, I can look at the source, I can evaluate the source, I can evaluate the information, I can internalize it, I can evaluate it, and then I believe it or I don't. That's a logical appeal. An emotional appeal, or pathos, is to get people to feel an emotion about it, right? Wear your seatbelt, because in Indiana, we have what's called a positive ID law, which means that a person close to you has to ID the body before the coroner will write a death certificate, which means wear your seatbelt, because if you don't, you may not survive a wreck. And then your mother is going to have to come in and ID your broken, bloody, dead body in a morgue on a metal tray. Is that what you want? Do you want that to happen? Wear your seatbelt. And so when you see that, what happens then is that you're getting people to feel something, and they go, oh, I don't want to do that. No, that'd be horrible. Then they engage with the topic. A ethical appeal would be one of two things. Either wear your seatbelt because it's the law, because it's the right thing to do, right? Or you could have experts or people that people believe in or trust authority. So Ellen DeGeneres gets up and says, hey, wear your seatbelt. It's the right thing to do. Or the chief of police gets on TV and he says, look, this is the law. This is what you should do. And when we trust those people, we believe in those people, we believe their authorities, then we tend to believe in them. We've already talked about reasoning and logic, so that's kind of good. We've already explained what argument is, okay? Again, support. The more information you can give people, the better. It helps them really, really, really understand it and buy into it, and they believe it, okay? That's really the big key here. Is you really want to support your position. And remember, support, right? You're building a foundation to put your argument on. If there's 3 levels of support: facts, examples, and illustration. Facts are number statistics. They're discrete pieces of data, right? If I say, for instance, 1 out of 4 Americans will be exposed to the AIDS virus at least once in their life. If you assume that as a fact, okay, there's a piece of information. But what does that fact really mean? If I say 1 out of 4 people are exposed to the AIDS virus at least once in their life, I can turn that into an example. I can say, in this classroom of 28 people, 7 of them have been exposed, 1/4. Now that starts to become real for people, because they can look around and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, it becomes real. So I take this discrete piece of data, which is meaningful, but what does that really show, right? And then if I make it an illustration, I put a human face on it. If 1 in 4 people are exposed to the AIDS virus at least once in their life, or 7 people in this room, if we were in a classroom together, or it's Grandmother Mary. It's that woman that you have at your church, that she goes every Wednesday night and vacuums before service. She's there every Sunday. She brings cookies for the classes, for the Sunday school classes. She sings, she dances. She was a nurse in World War II. She met her husband at a USO event. They were married for, decades upon decades. And just about 3 years ago, she slipped and fell, broke her hip. And then during surgery, she had a blood transfusion and she was given blood that had been exposed to the AIDS virus. And so we take that discrete piece of data and we put a human face on it in which you can empathize or feel with them. And so what we've done there is if you walk your information through those three levels, facts, examples, and illustrations, right? And if you take a discrete piece of data that is meaningful but doesn't really show anything, I can't really connect to, or I can't really engage with or be, emotional about, right? As I walk that through, your audience then becomes more and more connected to that information. Right. And so what we really want to do is we really want our audience to see what we're talking about. Again, we want to provide more information that is necessary. We want to really sell this. We want to provide lots and lots and lots and lots of information, overwhelming amounts from credible sources that people believe and buy into. And then the final key to, again, it says writing, but we're talking about speaking, is to really match your purpose and your audience, what they know, what they feel, what their expectations are, tapping into their concerns, tapping into those things that really get them engaged and moving, right? Because we really want this audience to see it, feel it, and believe it.